And now we're ready to start. We'll finish up the book that we've been reading for a while, Roger Williams, His Life, Work, and Ideals. And we're in the last chapter, and this last chapter closes with the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, and Rhode Island does not want to ratify this Constitution until it's very clear in the Constitution about separation of church and state. So let's read on. When the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787 left the question of the establishment of a state church and of religious liberty untouched and undecided in the Constitution, which it submitted to the people for ratification, the people of Rhode Island deliberately refused to ratify the Constitution and served notice to the federal government that they would never ratify it unless and until a Bill of Rights was added that guaranteed absolute separation of church and state. The non-interference of the federal government in religious matters, and the unmolested and free exercise of the conscience of the individual in religious concerns. 3 years passed by, and still Rhode Island held out against ratification after all the other states had ratified and were operating under the Constitution. Finally, Congress threatened the little colony. Bills of coercion were introduced into Congress and discussed. Still, Rhode Island said no. The people of Rhode Island repeated their request for constitutional safeguards in favor of religious liberty and the inalienable rights of all men. Steps were taken by the other states to boycott and isolate Rhode Island, to compel her to come into the Union by ratifying the Constitution. Even Washington became irked and impatient at Rhode Island's delay. Hamilton thought she ought to be coerced to ratify. Congress proposed by legislation and by threat of force to bring her into line with the rest of the states. But Rhode Island stood as firm as Roger Williams. She was ready to arm herself, one man against 60. At this critical moment, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who had been ardent disciples of Roger Williams' principles, came to the rescue. Thomas Jefferson had expressed the wish and hope that some of the states would refuse to ratify the Constitution until proper guarantees of human rights and religious freedom had been annexed. Jefferson said, "By the Constitution you have protected the government from the people, but what have you done to protect the people from the government?" Madison and Jefferson finally persuaded President Washington to untie the Gordian knot by recommending the annexation of a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. Washington agreed and suggested that Madison become a candidate for the House of Representatives in Congress so that he could engineer through Congress the adoption of the recommendation of the Bill of Rights. Madison was elected from Virginia upon the pledge that he would secure, if elected, the passage of a resolution to add 10 amendments to the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights. Guaranteeing religious liberty is one of the fundamentals of a free people. Because of this guarantee and pledge given to them, the people of Rhode Island ratified the Constitution of the United States on May 29, 1790, and entered the sisterhood of the 13 original states which completed the Union of the United States of America. Yet Rhode Island would not ratify without sending with her certificate of ratification the following request and admonition: that religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator, and the manner of discharging it, can be directed only by reason and conviction, and not by force or violence, and therefore all men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and that no particular religious sect or society ought to be favored or established by law in preference to others. End quote. 17 days after the ratification of the Constitution by Rhode Island, June 15, 1790, the Great Bill of Rights, guaranteeing religious liberty in the First Amendment of the Constitution, together with other inalienable rights, was adopted and placed in the Constitution as the sheet anchor of American liberties. Thus, the great principle of religious liberty and the separation of church and state, as well as the principle that civil government should function in civil things only, which Roger Williams established in the founding of Rhode Island in 1636, became an established principle in the founding of the federal government under the Constitution of the United States as the result of the persistent refusal of the followers of Roger Williams to ratify the Constitution until assured of religious freedom under the Constitution. Indirectly, Roger Williams became the builder through the adoption of his ideals of the greatest republic in the world. If a man's ideals and work survive him and continue to bring forth a harvest of precious fruit in blessings upon humanity, he is truly a great man. The best way to judge this man is by the contrast between the Puritan scheme of government and the Rhode Island experiment. The Puritans in Massachusetts and Connecticut established their government upon the theory, subjection in the Lord ought to be yielded to the magistrates in all lawful things commanded by them for conscience' sake, and matters of faith and worship, or such erroneous opinions or practices as either in their own nature or in the manner of publishing and maintaining them are destructive to the external peace and order which Christ has established in the church, may be lawfully called to account and proceeded against by the censures of the church and by the power of the civil magistrate. The Puritans, in prescribing the duties of the civil magistrate, laid down the following rule: it is his duty to take order that unity and peace be preserved in the church, that the truth of God be kept pure and entire, that all blasphemies and heresies be suppressed, all corruptions and abuses in worship and discipline be prevented or reformed, and all the ordinances of God duly settled, administered, and observed. On this hypothesis of government, the Puritans proceeded to unite the church and the state and to enforce every religious obligation, every divine ordinance and religious custom and observance under the duress of civil magistrate and the penalties of criminal codes. Everybody was compelled to support the established church by the payment of his tithes, whether he was a member of the church or not. All parents, whether members of the established church or not, had to have their infants officially sprinkled or suffer punishment at the whipping post or by a fine. Everybody had to attend divine services on Sunday, whether a professor of religion or not, or pay a fine of 10 shillings. All labor and secular business of every kind, except works of necessity and charity, were prohibited on Sunday under the penalty of the whipping post or fines and imprisonment. One of the Sunday laws read as follows: "Whosoever shall profane the Lord's day, or any part of it, either by sinful, servile work, or by unlawful sport, recreation, or otherwise, whether willfully or in careless neglect, shall be duly punished by fine, imprisonment, or corporally. But if the court, upon examination, find that the sin was proudly, presumptuously, and with a high hand committed against the known command and authority of the blessed God, such a person therein despising and reproaching the Lord shall be put to death." Both Massachusetts, that was the end quote. Now, Longacre is saying, both Massachusetts and Connecticut, under the Puritan regime, enacted more than 250 separate and distinct compulsory Sunday observance regulations, many of which are still existent upon the statute books of the states, which comprised the 13 original colonies. Roger Williams would have none of these religious regulations upon the civil statute books of Rhode Island. That state never had a compulsory Sunday observance law upon its statute books, nor any religious obligation enforced under the penal codes, while Roger Williams had a controlling a voice in the affairs, nor did he believe the church or any of its schools in which religious education was imparted should receive financial aid from the general tax fund. He was just as much opposed to subsidizing the religious teacher as he was to paying the clergy from the general tax fund of all the people. His reasons for opposing a state subsidy to religious institutions were sound. It is unjust to tax an unbeliever to support the teachings of religion. State subsidy for the support of religion means state control of religion. To the Puritan clergy, this new doctrine was heresy, and to the Puritan magistrate, it was sedition. When Roger Williams struck a blow at the authority of the civil officers to interfere with church matters and to punish offenses against God and religion, he was condemned and expelled by the general court for new and dangerous opinions against the authority of the magistrates. He told them that he would never refuse to obey them in purely civil matters. His persecutors informed him that they were not punishing him for his religion, but for sedition and disturbing the public peace and jeopardizing the public good. This was the same pretext upon which the pagan rulers of Rome burned the early Christians at the stake. It was this same kind of sophistry that the Jewish ruler invoked when he justified the crucifixion of Christ, saying that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Under a religion established by law, irrespective of its kind, whether pagan, Jewish, or Christian, religious persecution is inevitable and religious liberty impossible. As the Jewish hierarchy thought they would put an end to Christ by crucifying him, so the Puritan hierarchy thought they would put an end to the alleged dangerous and damnable heresies taught by Roger Williams by sending him into exile. The Puritans banished him to the wilderness to perish. But Providence watched over him, protected and nurtured him, and gave him the courage of a hero and the spirit of a martyr. God had brought him into the world for such a time and such a mission as this. Persecuted in the old world from his youth and banished in the new, he was led forth by Providence to a new and goodly land, to found an asylum for the oppressed children of God, where the wicked should cease from troubling them. And then Longacre finishes his book with these lines of poetry. Careless seems the great avenger, history's pages but record one death grapple in the darkness twixt old systems and the word. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, yet the scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. And that ends our book. God is keeping watch and always has kept watch over his own.